In what may be one of the most culturally significant interviews we have seen in a very long time, the BBC interviewed Elon Musk. And in this interview, Elon Musk asks the reporter about a rise in hate speech because the media keeps claiming that there's all of this hate speech and misinformation and disinformation and malinformation. Elon says to this man, "You've seen more hate speech? Give me one example." And do you know what the reporter says? Well, it's remarkable. This was an epic takedown of the lies from the corporate press. And how this all began is because Elon Musk's Twitter slapped I believe it was a state-sponsored media outlet tag on the BBC, or state-affiliated or something to that effect. And of course, the BBC is. The argument from this individual is that no, actually, the BBC is funded by a license fee. Yes, a license fee that is taken by force from the people in the UK and then used to fund their state propaganda outlet. Well, this led to a very long sit-down interview, and get this, over 3 million people listened to this takedown. And I think it matters. And I want you to listen to it. It's a few minutes long, but Elon Musk does not relent. He basically exposes them for the fake news that they are. The reason I think this is significant, we are hearing a journalist espouse lies. Why? Well, I think this guy who gave the interview is an example of the banality of evil. A man who has no idea what he's talking about, who heard it somewhere and just repeats it. Now, don't get me wrong. We're all guilty of this to a certain extent. But this guy has no business making claims with no facts to Elon Musk. And when Elon Musk says, "Can you give me one example?" do you know what his response should have been? Honestly, I can't. And then if Elon Musk says, "Then how do you know it's true?" the guy could say, "Well, maybe I'm wrong about that." It's really just that simple. That's not what he does, though. Instead, we see the persistent narrative from the likes of, I love this one. And this is what we're going to get into as it pertains to the fake news. Max Berger tweeted, "If you had told me 10 years ago what would become of Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, Dave Chappelle, Louis C.K., and Kanye West, I would not have begun to believe you. Anyone have a theory about what happened there?" Well, you see, Max Berger is in a cult. There is a cult that formed due to social media algorithms that I love talking about. And Glenn Greenwald strikes back by showing, in fact, it is Democrats that have changed. Republicans have changed too. They've moved more libertarian. But Democrats have shifted more dramatically towards the authoritarian, demanding that the U.S. government should take steps to restrict false information online. Tech companies should take steps to restrict false information online. Which brings me to the epic takedown by Elon Musk, seen and listened to by millions of people. And my point is such: if we should take down fake news, we have to start with the mainstream media. Take a listen to this.
To be in content moderation, and we've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that something that you want to address?
Talking about? I mean, you use Twitter,
right?
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
but just a personal anecdote, like what do you? I don't.
Personally, for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content, yeah, personally. But I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
You see more hate speech personally?
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No, I'm not saying anything. I'm
just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content. And I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples. Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use. Honestly, I don't.
You can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why, because I don't actually use that for you feed anymore because I just don't particularly like it.
But
And actually, a lot of people are quite similar. I only look at my following.
You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and
How did you see the hateful content?
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen you hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
You can't give a single one.
And I'm saying
I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's false.
No, what I claimed.
Slide.
What I claimed was there are many organizations that say that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my feed or not, I mean, right, and
literally
if you look at something
one.
like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK, they will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Right, and as I've already said, I don't use that feed. But
how would you know that?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single.
It is a psychopathic cult. This reporter heard from an expert that it's happening and then said, yes, I too agree it is happening. And Elon went, wow, can you explain what happened? Well, no, I can't. Well, how can I fix it if you don't tell me what happened? Well, I can't. I'll tell you what happened. I'll break it down for you. This reporter for the BBC has not seen a rise in hate speech. I believe he's lying. What in reality happens is that he's on Twitter seeing people tweet about hate speech, tweet about Elon Musk being bad or something to that effect. These experts in these organizations say, yes, there's tons of hate. Please give us more money because we need money to fight hate. And then the reporters regurgitate it because they want to fit in. They want to feel good. You know, I got a lot of hate the other day for my take on Mario Brothers. Don't know, don't care. It's not going to change my opinion. I am not chasing after algorithms. These people are desperate to fit in. Their minds can only work if they are synchronized with the opinions of other people, despite the fact that there are clear logical breaking points. What he is saying makes literally no sense, but he heard it from an expert. Therefore, it must be true. And then in order to assert the claim that it's true, he has to be a witness to it. To put it simply, when he sees that the mainstream and popular narrative is that hate speech is on the rise and that the BBC has reported as such, he must agree with the BBC. And in order to justify those claims, he has to be able to say, I've seen it. Well, that's put to the test. When Elon Musk simply says, oh, wow, can you give me one example?
Right. And as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know there's hateful content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time. COVID misinformation. You changed the COVID misinformation.
Has
rules.
BBC changed its COVID misinformation?
The BBC does not set the rules on Twitter, so I'm asking you.
No, I'm talking about the BBC's misinformation about COVID.
Uh-oh.
I'm literally asking you about, you changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, it then disappeared. Why do that?
Well, COVID is no longer an issue.
So he goes on to basically say, this is a separate issue, but he does go on to say that the BBC published tons of misinformation about COVID. And so why weren't these things being enforced against other people? So here's how it basically happens. This reporter reaches out to Elon Musk saying, you've labeled us state funded. Can we do an interview? And he goes, yes, it'll be live and we'll do it tonight. And they said, okay, I guess. 3 million people were listening to this live on Twitter Spaces. In this one tweet posted by Elon Musk, it has 9.7 million views. The video itself has 3.2 million views. It was one of the biggest, most culturally significant moments to happen when Elon Musk masterfully, but really simply, took down the corporate press. Now, I don't know if there's a better avatar for what the corporate press could be than this guy, James, what's his name, Clyburn or something like that. But the reality was, Elon Musk points out in this Twitter space that the rules were being unevenly enforced. He talks about COVID misinformation, and Elon's like, the BBC was publishing COVID misinformation. And yet Twitter doesn't label them misinformation. So here's the story we have from the Daily Mail. Here's the breakdown of the interview with Elon Musk. I want to give you some of the actual facts from the interview before we talk about the corporate press and Glenn Greenwald's tweet. Elon Musk claims Twitter is breaking even, blue checks will be gone next week, and that he sleeps on the couch of the 7th floor library. Also defends reducing staff of 8,000 to just 1,500 to avert bankruptcy in biggest interview since painful takeover. Now, I do want to stress there are a lot of people who don't believe that 3 million number is correct. And when I saw that it said Twitter Spaces 3.3 million, I didn't believe it. I'm sorry. Like, having worked on the internet and been in live streaming and all that stuff, 3.3 million is absolutely unheard of. Absolutely unheard of. And it could be true. Other people are pointing out that it seemed that Twitter Space numbers were generally inflated, but maybe, I don't know. Or maybe people were just watching Elon Musk take down the corporate press. So the gist of the interview is, I don't care to go over the basics of the generalities of the interview. Elon Musk says they're breaking even, they've reduced staff, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was a lot more in this interview than just him epically smacking down the corporate press. It's probably worth pointing out this news before we get into, I think, what really matters. This tweet. I saw this from Glenn Greenwald. Who changed? Who changed? Here's the tweet from Max Berger, and I want to read this to you. I think it's funny. Berger said, first, who is Max Berger? He's Justice Democrats, Elizabeth Warren, blah, 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 working on something new. He says, if you had told me 10 years ago what would become of Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, Dave Chappelle, Louis C.K., and Kanye West, I would not have begun to believe you. Anyone have a theory about what happened there? Well, I mean, as it pertains to Kanye West, yeah, that's a whole different story compared to anybody else. But the reality is they didn't change. I mean, let's be honest, they didn't change. Are you shocked that Dave Chappelle did a comedy routine where he mocked Asian people by squinting his eyes and doing an old Chinese stereotype? Why? He had a whole bunch of content like that from the Chappelle Show in the 2000s. He says it seemed like what happened here is the curse of Gen X contrarian. The fetishization of being heterodox and contradictory, not selling out, etc., can easily become reactionary when you have no ideology. Anyway, it's kind of sad. As an elder millennial, some of these dudes were shining lights in the dark days of peak neoliberalism. Kanye was anti-Bush when few celebs would go there. Chappelle was pushing forward the conversation on racism. Louis C.K. seemed like a decent guy. What is that? No, he didn't. I was never a big fan of Elon or Bill Maher, but for some, they probably fall in this category too. What happened to these people? Well, Glenn Greenwald lays it down very simply. First, we have this. As I showed you early on, the partisan divisions, you can see it for yourself. And the reason I think this matters, and this was tough because there's more sensational news that I could have covered that I probably would have gotten more clicks and all that stuff. So become a member at timcast.com if you think we do a good job. Glenn Greenwald is pointing out quite simply, the U.S. government should take steps to restrict false info online. Democrats went from 40% in 2018 to 65% in 2021. And the belief that tech companies should went from 60 to 76. But I'd be real interested in seeing, going back even further, who changed. The Democrats did. I mean, it's fairly obvious. Take a look at this one. Wide partisan differences in views of most federal agencies, but Americans in both parties view National Park Service, Postal Service, and NSA favorably. Take a look at this. The Republican Party views the CDC unfavorable, EPA unfavorable, Department of Education unfavorable, Transportation, Health and Human. I mean, I'll just go through the whole list. Health and Human Services, FBI, IRS, Federal Reserve. The Republican Party has a favorable view of the Social Security Administration, negative for the CIA, negative for the DOJ. They view the Postal Service favorably. They just slightly view Homeland Security favorably. NASA is pretty good. The Park Service is pretty good. And Veterans Affairs is pretty good. Now take a look at the Democrats. They have, it's not even a question. When you look at the Republicans' views of all the governmental agencies, it's like unfavorable for the CDC, 63% unfavorable. Let's see, the FBI, 53% unfavorable. The IRS, 64%. The Democrats have a favorable view of the IRS. That says right there, these people have gone insane. Hands down. Nobody likes the IRS. It was always considered political suicide to come out and talk about increasing taxes. Now you've got Democrats. Here's what happened. Democrats proposed 80,000 or whatever new IRS agents, so they must defend it because they're a psychotic cult. Look at this. CDC, favorable. EPA, favorable. Department of Education, favorable. Transportation, it's all favorable. FBI, 65% favorable. IRS, favorable. The Federal Reserve, 55% favorable? How is that possible? No one even knows what the Federal Reserve does or is, yet for some reason, they march in lockstep behind these institutions like blind lemmings. I think it's not fair to insult lemmings because Disney was shoving them off a cliff with a broom or something like that. But this is just absolutely insane. The DOJ, 57% favorable. I shout out to the Postal Service. Everybody seems to like those guys. Homeland Security, 56% favorable. Are you kidding me? George W. Bush created the Department of Homeland Security. And let's take a look back at what this dude, Max Berger, said. Kanye was opposed to, was anti-Bush. Is anti-Bush? You, my friend, dude, are on the side of DHS. What happened to these people? That's the simple question. Because if I were to tell you that I'm anti-war, I was always a big fan of Ron Paul, but I was more left-leaning. So I was like, I like the freedom aspect of it. He changed my views on many things. I liked the anti-war stuff, but I wasn't a right-leaning guy. So I often say when it came to Ron Paul, we had on the show last night, that even if we disagree on these issues, his whole thing is like, but I'm going to leave you alone. And I'm like, hey, there we go. Right. This works for me. Libertarian, huh? It's remarkable to me because let's go through this. Where have I been my entire life? The CDC, neutral to not caring. Right now, I'd say moderately unfavorable. I don't know about 63%, but probably 63% if I was going to wait. EPA, neutral to unfavorable. Department of Education, neutral to unfavorable. Transportation, neutral to unfavorable. Health and Human Services, probably slightly favorable, to be completely honest. Going back. FBI, probably very unfavorable, considering what we've long known, especially pertaining to the war movement. The IRS, I have always been extremely unfavorable on. And I'll tell you why. I remember it like it was yesterday. It wasn't my first job. I remember I got a job. My first job ever was my family's business. And my first ever actual filling out a job application form was for Portillo's in Chicago. That's right. Slinging French fries. I was 16 years old and didn't think much about it. Got paid. It is what it is. And then I got a job when I was 18 working at American Eagle Airlines. And I was getting paid something like $10.75 an hour. And I remember that day, like so many others, when I said, I got to pay my bills, I got to fix my car, I got to buy shoes, I am struggling. Thank God I worked 40 hours this week because I sure do need that $400 and some odd dollars. Now, I know what taxes are. So I was expecting to get, I don't know, $350, $340. What did I get? Like $220 something. And I said, huh? This is like half my paycheck. This has got to be a mistake. And I went and asked somebody and they all started laughing. And they said, welcome to Uncle Sam. I'm like, I'm only getting like $5 an hour. They're like, yep, that's how it works. It was like probably $260 something, to be honest. Yeah, it was a third or whatever of my paycheck. And then I just had to cross my fingers and hope that I could make it. I couldn't. It was impossible. It was impossible to do that job. You basically just sleep there. Was homeless half the time. So IRS, not a fan. Never been. The Federal Reserve, not a fan. Never been. Unfavorable. Social Security, very, very unfavorable because that goes in line with me with the IRS. CIA, absolutely unfavorable. DOJ, oh, you better believe unfavorable. The Postal Service, neutral to not caring. Homeland Security, remarkably unfavorable. NASA, very favorable. Park Service, neutral to favorable probably, and Veterans Affairs very favorable. I'm not an anarchist. I'm not a hardcore libertarian. I've always been classically liberal or traditionally liberal. My point is this. If you look at where Democrats are today, it doesn't align with anything I've ever believed. And I can give you a timeline justification for exactly why my positions on these things were the way they are. And I take a look at the Republican Party being unfavorable on the FBI, and that seems unheard of to me because I remember back in time, the Republican Party was pro-government. pro-small government, but they come out law enforcement and all that stuff. Now, the IRS I can certainly understand. But this is remarkable to me to see that the Democrats are 100% on board for all of these things. I'm saying that hyperbolically, clearly not 100%. It's like 80, 74, 62. But when they come out and they say that I've changed, or that this guy specifically referring to Glenn Greenwald or Matt Taibbi, the evidence is clear. You are all in an authoritarian death cult. You are psychotic. And Elon Musk points out in an epic fashion exactly what this is. This guy cannot give a single example of this argument about hate speech. Not a single one. I can make several arguments. You want to talk about hate speech? Let's do this. An example of hate speech. Perhaps what these organizations are referring to is people expressing their opinions on Twitter, for which now that people have been unbanned, we are seeing the expressing of opinions that they don't like. And that's what Elon Musk said. Are you talking about things you don't like or hate speech? And that's just it. The reality is, I could certainly make an argument that the left's view of hate speech certainly increased, but their definitions mean nothing to me because hate speech to them is someone saying something like, we should not allow children to get sex changes. They call that hate speech. I call it more of an academic argument about the merits based on what we see in Scandinavia. It has nothing to do with whether I hate someone or not. It has everything to do with whether or not I actually care about someone, want to protect these kids from harm. But they'll call that hate speech. As for this guy, he exemplifies it perfectly. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's not seen any examples. Because I could actually have a conversation on whether or not someone perceives hate speech or otherwise. This guy can't even do it. And when Elon Musk says, please, one example, the guy just says, oh. And that is the basis for so much of the news that people consume, that these people consume. This is why you see these switches, this jumping from in their worldviews, because they just march in lockstep with each other, regardless of what is true. That's it. So the question then becomes, how do we as a nation survive if that's the case? I'm sorry to say, I'm not entirely sure we can. Now, of course, this guy's British, but they've got their similar problems. His worldview, fractured, dejected, and unremarkable, is what's happening in the United States, the same as it is in many Western nations. And I believe it's based on social media. These people are more interested in just repeating what they've heard from other people as opposed to actually giving their own honest opinions on it. So I will say this. I made a video about the Mario Brothers movie yesterday, and boy, were people not happy with it. I think it's like 30% thumbs down or something. I don't care. What am I going to do about that? I'm not going to change my opinion and come out and be like, oh, actually, you're right. It was a great movie. No, my opinion is what my opinion is. If you don't like it, you don't have to like it. But I'm not going to change my opinion. I watched a movie. Here's what I think. That's it. We can have a debate about it. I don't know how much people really care. But this guy, I'll tell you what he does. He sees the experts say it, and therefore he must repeat it because he doesn't want dislikes. This is the reality of modern media and the cult. They're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, they're on YouTube. And when they see thumbs down, when they don't get likes, they think, I've done something wrong. I need more internet points. The funny thing is, despite the fact I may get dislikes on videos periodically, I've got substantially more followers than this guy by just being myself. So perhaps that's the lesson to these people. You really want to be somebody, be a journalist? Speak your mind, be original. Take a look at the success of Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi. Massive success. Glenn Greenwald with his 2 million followers. Bravo, good sir. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.